Hello and welcome to the Lou Review. This is your host, Rosa Hart, and I am here today with a new friend of mine, Janan Sarwar. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. I love what you're doing in the Lou Review podcast.
Well, then you're in the right place, which is the hot seat. So I have invited you here today because you yourself are a publisher now. And you have your own company, and it's called Global Bookshelves. So tell us about Global Bookshelves and what it is and what makes it unique as a publishing company.
Absolutely. So as you shared, I'm Janan, and I've been in the book publishing industry for over 10 years. And Global Bookshelves International is a hybrid publishing company focusing on underrepresented voices and publishing stories that can build community through literacy. And so having stories and allowing people to share their voice, people can apply to publish with me. And I've been honored to be able to do this for the past few years now. And what makes it really set apart from other publishing companies partly is me. I'm a pharmacist by trade.
So a pharmacist.
Yes, ended up in book publishing, but
wow.
There are reasons it's good to have a pharmacist publisher. Very detail oriented, and
yes, one would hope.
So there are very little to no errors in any book. Hey, you can't. It's hard to have a completely error-free book, but that's why I'm not in pharmacy.
Yeah,
let's just put it that way. But yeah, so I really love what I do. I'm very passionate about this and spreading the word because I think it's very important for people to be represented in the books that they read, and also not just for the person that's represented. It's important for us to learn about other cultures as well.
Oh, so. Definitely. And I think, there's been a huge push towards diversity appreciation and understanding one another. And so it's very timely that you're taking the lead on this. And I just got done watching your TED Talk again because I watched it before, but you just have such a great way of telling your story. So if you have not heard Janan's TED Talk, do you remember the title of it off the top of your head if they want to look it up on YouTube?
Yes. So it's a TEDx. I'm not
Excuse
quite
me.
there yet. But it's judging your book covers.
Yeah.
What your bookshelves say about you.
Yeah. And I don't want to give too much away in case people want to go watch it on YouTube, but do you want to kind of give a summary of as far as the meaning behind your work?
Yeah. Well, something I'll start with my catchphrase, which is, there's a book for that. And I think that's where things start and end with me, that books have been a source and a resource for so many things in my life. And a lot of the reason why the inspiration behind Global Bookshelves is that I didn't always get to see myself in the books that I read, but you can still learn through others. And it's important to know that there are books that can represent you see yourselves in. That's kind of like a mirror. There are books where you can look through and it's like you see another world outside. That's a window book. And then there are some books that are so immersive. It's like a sliding glass door. And you can walk through and become a part of that world and become immersed in that world. So, finding a balance of those three, because we tend to try to gravitate towards things that we know. And there's so much that you can learn and become better when you widen your perspectives. So that's a little bit of what I talk about, specifically why representation matters and importance of just reading to our youth and reading ourselves.
Definitely. And anything we can encourage people to read more.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. So how you said you got started publishing like a decade ago, but you only started Global Bookshelves a few years ago.
Yes.
So let's go back a decade. What was your first experience with publishing?
Well, yeah, I definitely want to explain that because publishing in general is this mystic thing. There's a lot of things people don't know. And I'll share that just off the bat, there's traditional publishing, there's self-publishing. And I know you've heard of both of those. And in between, there's something called hybrid publishing. Traditional publishing is what I did for about 8 years prior to starting Global Bookshelves. Mm-hmm. But traditional publishing is what you think of if you've heard of Penguin Random House. Mm-hmm. So there's these big 5 traditional publishers that are out there, and another way of thinking about traditional publishing is you have a good book idea, you pitch it, maybe you get an agent who loves your idea, sells it, or takes it to the publisher, and then that publisher is like, oh my gosh, I love what you've done, let me give you a lot of money. This is the way a lot of people think about publishing. You get a big cash advance, you sit and you write your book, and then you get royalties for the rest of your life. That's what people think about traditional publishing. That's an over-exaggerated reality. That is traditional
but there are
publishing.
Movies about this to keep the story rolling in our heads of how this works. Yeah.
And it can. And so the what I did those 8 years, believe it or not, was in a niche world. I was a pharmacist publisher for the American Pharmacist Association. Pharmacists need books too.
Right.
So I graduated from Chapel Hill, North Carolina at UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy back in 2013. And so after I graduated, I did a year fellowship in something called educational technology, a fancy way of saying I had a pharmacy degree, a doctor of pharmacy degree, and I knew how the content, how you learn the material. I worked with experts and basically helped convert the expert information into digestible pieces to teach in an online format. I did that for a year in a fellowship and researched how that worked. The American Pharmacist Association on its own had a publishing department, and they needed to hire somebody that had a pharmacy degree and experience in educational technology. So that's where I came in, but they needed someone to help convert their books, their textbooks, to something more interactive, more easily digestible. That's exactly what I knew how to do. So I started as a pharmacist on the team amongst a lot of other English majors and people that knew a lot about book publishing. And as I began to help with the technology, I started being really interested in the content because I knew the content. The books that they were publishing were all about over-the-counter medications or other things that are important in pharmacy education. So textbooks that are what are in all the different pharmacy schools in the U.S. and other countries to teach pharmacists. Wow. So long story short is I started off helping with the technology side and ended up working and growing my way over those 8 years. I became the publisher, the senior director in charge. My predecessor retired and taught me everything. And so I learned everything about traditional publishing. So that was that situation where it's not, we didn't have all the big bucks that the big 5 publishers have. But in the pharmacy world, if you were a pharmacist or another healthcare provider who had a great...
That's where you go.
Yeah, there isn't very much competition in that space. So if you were a pharmacist and and it still exists, so you have a really great book idea, you would pitch it, and I was the person that people would pitch to.
Wow.
And
you got to be the shark that said no.
Yes, sometimes we couldn't say yes, but sometimes I love, that's what I love about publishing. I got to see people's ideas go from idea to published book. And that's what I did for all those 8 years, and I left. It was when the pandemics just wasn't going away. It was 2021. At the time, I had a 1, 3, and 5-year-old.
Oh my goodness.
Lived here. Yeah, I lived here in Louisville. The APHA, the Pharmacy Association's based in DC, but we moved here because my husband, he is a pharmacist as well, and so we moved because of his job.
Okay.
AmerisourceBergen, if you're familiar with that.
Okay, and then you were able to continue to work remotely for a while?
I worked remotely from 2018 is when we moved here to 2021.
Since before it was cool.
Yeah, so it was, I knew, and that's what's exciting about publishing and about my company. I guess what's nice about publishing in general is you can do it from anywhere. As long as you have the players in place. So that I've known how to do publishing. It is something you can do from at home, and so I was doing that. But then when the pandemic wasn't ending, and I had these three little daughters, and the irony of that I was working so much in my publishing job, and I love reading to my children, I wasn't even reading enough to them. Yeah, and so I made a transition into medical writing, which is another thing that some with healthcare providers and nurses and creating CE. I did that for a while I started and launched Global Bookshelves.
Wow, that is incredible. And what does it look like to be running Global Bookshelves. So did you start by like writing your own children's books that reflected you and your family, or did you start by like publishing other people's books?
Yeah, I thought that I would just publish mine, but guess what? Children's books, they seem like they're short picture books. Oh, it would be so easy to write. It's like 500 words. They're so hard because each of those words matter. I actually thought that's how I was going to start Global Bookshelves, by making our own books, and joined a children's writing group and learned that it just how complex and how important the real estate of every word, and the meter and the rhyme and the rhythm, even if you don't rhyme, like there's something called story breath. There's so much to children's book publishing. So what I did instead is I found books that I would publish, or actually the first 2 books that I published were actually published in another country.
Oh, wow.
And in order to help them increase their distribution, because they weren't able to print in America, I said, hey, I really love your stories. My children were part of my editorial board to review.
Yeah.
And that's evolved. That process has evolved. And I mentioned, you have to kind of apply or submit to publish with Global Bookshelves now. I have a committee to review proposals.
And is it just children's books now?
It's not all children's books.
Okay.
I publish basically anything that really, as long as I can find an editor that I've worked with. So right now I have children's books. We've done our first superhero novel, just debuted this week in May, in May 2024. And then I've done memoirs as well that are about very underrepresented topics. And they've been doing well,
Yeah, definitely. So. That is just utterly incredible. I love how your story has just like really just taken such a wild turn, and it, you said yes to some really unorthodox like experiences. It sounds like, of course, your fellowship, it sounds like, set you up for some of that experience, but like when you were going to pharmacy school, I imagine you were imagining yourself to be a pharmacist, like in a pharmacy, right? Not all this book work, right? Or have you always wanted to be an author? And was this kind of like unleashing a part of you that you didn't listen to before? Or how do you feel about that?
Fun story. I got interested in pharmacy because in undergrad, I had a drug reaction. I was taking Bactrim that has a sulfa compound in it, and it interacted with azithromycin, an antibiotic. I was sick one day. I was taking Bactrim for some acne, and I was in undergrad, and I had a really bad drug reaction. It took me to the ICU. I had to leave school. I was pre-med, actually, and... But then when I learned how a drug reaction can be so detrimental, it was almost what they call a Stevens-Johnson syndrome reaction. My skin, it was very scary. But I turned out everything was fine, and that really intrigued me into pharmacy. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go to pharmacy school. And I applied, I got in. Guess, this is the funny part, or the ironic part. I started working in a pharmacy. Every time I worked in the pharmacy, I worked weekends. My eyes would turn red.
Were you allergic to the pharmacy?
I'm allergic to my profession. Goodness. I learned in pharmacy school that I was allergic to my profession. Most people, when you think pharmacist, you think Walgreens, CVS, whatever. Okay, so can't work in those settings. I really can't. I'm literally allergic. It's the sulfa. It's the only explanation. It's just in the air
because it's crushing it and everything, aren't they?
It's just a very common compound. Even when I wasn't a technician or handling it, just being around it, it's in the air. So alternatively, you think, okay, maybe I can go to the hospital. I have PTSD from my own hospital stay. I get really anxious, and I made it. I passed pharmacy school, but I did not want to be a clinical pharmacist. The funny thing was, before the fellowship, the reason I got the fellowship is I did the least number of clinical rotations as I could, and instead I opted for like academic. I thought I would be in academia. I really wanted to teach. My dad's a professor, so there you go. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can teach something, and the professors really saw this kind of the ability to write, and I did photography while I was in pharmacy school.
That's interesting.
That was my first business. I've been an entrepreneur. as a young child, I got my first camera when I was like 10 years old, and I'm the one that's always taking the films of different events or whatever, taking snapshots.
You're always welcome to go to events with me. We will just stand next to each other and get all the pretty pictures.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah. I love that kind of thing. So yeah, I was always like the webmaster, all these nerdy things. So I really, right now, one of the things I didn't mention that I do is I actually do pharmacy career coaching for pharmacists who, because I actually was lost myself. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm a pharmacist. I made it into, I work, the job that I had where I was helping in the publishing at the American Pharmacists Association, amazing job.
Yeah.
But when it was the pandemic and I was like, what am I going to do now? I thought I pigettonholed myself in this career.
Right. You paid a lot of money for a degree that's very specific.
And then I worked in publishing for like 8 more years. Where else could I work? I thought I could never work anywhere else. Like there's no other pharmacy publishing, what else am I going to do? But I actually sought career coaching myself.
Okay.
And the coach, I was telling him, like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And he said, I'm going to hire you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He was like, how many other pharmacists do you know that have published? How many books have you published this time? How many authors have you worked with? I was like, I don't know, a couple hundred. I've published like 40 textbooks. He was like, that's really cool experience. You can tell other people to follow your passions. And I believe in that. I think it is important, whether it's a side hustle.
Yeah.
And it relates to publishing books too. Like whether you have a book idea in you or you think it's important to tell your story, maybe it's important to pursue it, maybe it's not. And I talk to people to help them understand what path, whether it's important to publish, whether their book idea that they have, should it just be a blog first to see if people care? Or do you just post about it on social media to see if you're getting traction? Because there's one thing to write a book. That's one world, and I know a lot about that. There's a whole other world to getting people to actually buy it. So, yeah.
So how many people do you think want to write their own book?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a great statistic about that. 81% of Americans say they have a book in them. That's equivalent of like 200 million people.
Is that people wanting to think that they are interesting?
Yeah, and actually, so it's probably a good thing that only of that, like, less than 20% actually start writing and get halfway through, and of that percentage, like, we've got less than 1% actually publish something. So if you do think you have a book idea and you have written it, like, congratulations, you're a part of an elite echelon of people, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But once you're there, it's like, okay, what do? Do I self-publish? Do I know nothing about that? And do I pitch it to someone and go to that traditional publisher?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of gatekeeping in the industry.
Well, and it's got to be absolutely terrifying for someone who is brave enough to make themselves take the time and do the writing of whatever it is they want to write about, whether it's their own story or the story in their head.
Yeah.
To then show it to anybody, I know, is really full of trepidation for people. And then for to submit it to like a big publishing company to hear back something, or maybe just nothing.
Yes.
Do a lot of people just never hear anything back, or do they get like rejection letters, or how does that work?
If a publisher is nice, they should at least acknowledge, but some places say like, thanks for your submission. We'll get back to you within 8 months. And you might be like, I wrote a picture book. This takes 5 minutes to read. How could it take that long for someone to read it? But you've got to imagine the number of manuscripts on their desk, the backlog, the topics, and a lot of publishers have specific things that they're looking for, right? If they're going to invest, the thing I didn't really explain with the difference between traditional, hybrid, and self-publishing, it goes back to who's paying to create this book and who owns the copyright. So in the traditional publishing world, those big publishers, when you submit, it's great if you get picked up. They're going to take care of everything. That's why you get those checks. They take care of the editing. They take care of the design. But at the same time, they own everything too. And so if you have a lot of time and your passion is if you're really dedicated and you really want, those traditional major publishers, they have the distribution. They can get your book out there to the world. And if they're a really good publisher that has a good name, they have a great track record. And that's definitely really a smart way to go. But if you don't have an agent or you don't have the time and you're like, I just really want to publish my book and I just want to see it on the shelves, and you want control, because once again, if that traditional publisher, they can decide, okay, our book covers look like this. You have no say.
Yeah.
In children's books, a lot of times authors never even meet their illustrator.
Oh, wow.
Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
That's incredibly scary to think about.
Yeah.
Putting my work out there and then having somebody's art all over it. And like, do they get to even see it before it's published?
You get to see it, but you don't have much of a say, because in it's the publisher controls that, you know. Wow. And that's why you see a lot more people opting to either self-publish, or that hybrid model gives you a little bit about the best of the both worlds, where you get to own the copyright. You're investing though, right? And you get to say, okay, I want, if you want this kind of color or cover or what you want to see, you can have it happen, but you've got publishing experts that can support you and say, okay, well, here are industry standards, but yes, we can do this for you. Or and then the reason why you'd want to self-publish is if you want complete control, and you can still self-publishing, you can still get support if someone's like, oh, I don't know the first thing, what's an ISBN, how do I copyright my book, how do I decide, how do I distribute? There's a lot of questions people have, and that's why I've most recently in the last year, because now you know my story. I know a lot of people in healthcare. People still know me from my 8+ years, working in pharmacy publishing. I still get questions all the time. And they may not be answers that, it might not be something that I can help somebody with under Global Bookshelves, but I know the answer. And so I basically teamed up with a friend who's another pharmacist, and she is also a UI UX designer, knows
what
everything.
Does that mean?
So she does user interface, user experience. She's a pharmacist that basically, her name is Thierry Chim. She's amazing, lives in Washington State, so far away, but she does design. She has designed, she's been like, I've been creative and writing and reading since I was little. She's been designing and make really good at graphic design. She can do book covers, she can do interior layout. So she now works for a hospital, doing all of their design work for content, things that they have to publish and print. So it was a really perfect match. We met each other, and we were like, it would be really cool if we can combine forces. And I said, hey, I get questions from pharmacists all the time. And she's like, I want to do more design work. So we work together, and we've been helping pharmacists and other healthcare entrepreneurs that want to publish. And the main point that I share there, and the reason why all of that we were talking about before, traditional publishing and waiting for someone doesn't make sense for an entrepreneur, is sometimes you just need a book to be your business card. And
tell me more about that. How does that work?
A book is a business card. This concept, I didn't coin it, but
I heard it before. But how exactly is that supposed to work?
I would say the way you would think about that is, tell me actually, what's the difference between if I handed you a business card? What's just some obvious differences between getting a business card from an entrepreneur versus getting a book from them?
I would assume you know what you're talking about because you wrote the book on it.
Okay. That's a really great point. Yes.
Or maybe this person has some depth and substance, because if I want to know about them, I could read what they know in this book, maybe.
Yeah.
And they may not know anything contained on their business card. Their business card is so small, right? It's such a small representation of what they have to offer.
Exactly.
As a person or a business, I guess.
Perfect point. And let's elaborate on that. I'll go backwards. So the first one you said, or going backwards, it's small. Business card, and someone gives you a business card, or think like an entrepreneur, if you hand someone your business card, it's the person handing it is, this is all about me, me, right? My name, my phone number, my website. One big difference with a book is if you're aiming for it to be your book about your business, you can make it about the customer.
Yeah.
So you're not going to you choose who you hand your business card to. You choose who you're going to give or sell or market your book to.
Yeah.
and you can say, this is how I solve my problem. It's exactly what you're saying. Someone knows enough about this topic and knows enough about me and my problem to write a whole book on it. I'm going to hire them, because within like a business card, how many times have you gotten a business card, you lost it, or you threw it away?
I have transitioned to digital business cards for that exact reason.
Yeah.
I mean, what if I just like spill coffee on them? That is so unprofessional to hand people coffee stained business cards.
Yeah.
Not speaking from personal experience at all. But I've been using this really cool digital business card.
Blink or
Blink,
which one? Yes. Yeah.
I love using Blink.
Yes.
And that itself I feel like can look pretty impressive, but it's a multi-step process. And I did just meet an author who, she brought her book and I had to pay $20 for it as opposed to her just giving it to me.
Yeah.
But I did feel like, there's value contained in it. And if I wanted to understand and know her better, I could read her book.
Exactly.
Right? And then even pass it on and give that on to someone else. So, I definitely perceived the difference in value there versus just connecting with somebody's card. Because with a card, you don't necessarily have the why.
Right.
Of why do I want to know who you are? And is there any way you're relevant to my life?
Right.
Whereas a book should at least give you enough indication as to the subject.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I think it would be really cool if entrepreneurs who really want to show their thought leadership could create something that could solve, because entrepreneurs, their whole point is solving problems.
Yeah.
So if you can show in a small book, it doesn't have to be this like giant encyclopedia, but something that like, hey, I get you, I know what your problems are, and here's how I solve problems. It doesn't give everything away. And in business, it should be more about giving. You give and then you'll receive. And so it's really interesting. A lot of entrepreneurs have done this and do this, and it goes back to, their personal or anyone's why in publishing. Because if exchanging a book that is, like you said, $20, maybe it's that $20 or, less, but it can turn into a business relationship, which could be much more, or coaching, or you name it. It makes sense to do that. And so that's the other thing with a business card, how I explain it to people in the company that we created, Publishing in Doses. It's a pun because both of us are pharmacists. But it's this concept of you invest and you choose how you're going to design your business card, and you pay and you get a bunch of cards. That's the same. That's why you would self-publish. A person who is wanting to self-publish is, I want to invest in something. I choose, I design, and I get to decide if I want to sell it or if I want to give it away or whatever I want to do. You're in control. Because in other forms of publishing, back to with the traditional world, I mean, it's great. But for an entrepreneur, you don't get to know who's buying it. That information, all that's proprietary to the publisher.
Oh my goodness. Then you can't follow up with
follow
the buyers
leads
to see like, these are the people who are interested enough to buy my book.
Yeah.
Wow. I hadn't even thought of that. And then, but are there any downsides to self-publishing?
Yeah, the downsides are there is a stigma. There definitely is a stigma of, it's self-published.
I know you're all about removing stigma, right?
Yes.
So, what is the stigma?
That, that you've paid and you've done it, whereas with something that has been published by a publisher, or even like I mentioned, hybrid publishing, there are different places that require you to submit, and there's a review. There's no gatekeeping. Remember I said there's gatekeeping on one end, and self-publishing, it's a free-for-all. Anyone. And now with AI, literally anyone is publishing, and you'll hear that on TikTok and all these things that, I can just do this. So I think what I would say is that, anyone can publish these days. The stigma of self-publishing, the way to get over it is work with professional people. Find someone, if you're going to do a book cover, understand and learn what are the standards for what should go on a book cover. I can immediately see sometimes from far away, like, that definitely looks self-published. You can avoid that. There are ways to not seem and appear self-published. And peer review is one of the things that maybe could help you. So before editorial review, follow processes. There are definite processes and steps. As a pharmacist, I think it is important. I like to say, there are things that you should do, and you can make a self-published book look just as good and be just as good as a professionally or traditionally published book. And just ask if anyone out there listening is curious. I do free consultations for anyone that's interested in publishing, ever wondered, for 20 minutes. And then after that, if there's more support that I could do, I love to see how I can help people, because it's confusing, and there are different ways to navigate it, and not one size fits all.
So is there a website or somewhere people can get a hold of you for these consultations?
Yeah, so for my free consultation, it is on with publishinginDoses.com.
Okay.
But if someone's really has that, diversity angle, and they were really always wanted to publish something, and they needed a publisher, that's what Global Bookshelves is for. And then I'm the only Janan Sarwar that is out there that I know of. My personal website where all of this can be found, and I'm sure you'll link it, is bookjanan.com. Because I speak too. I speak about all this. I speak to different groups and employee resource groups and other spaces about the importance of diversity in reading, and inspiring parents to read to their children and all of that. So my pharmacy career has evolved a lot, and publishing career has as well, but it's exciting, and I love helping people decide what they want to do.
Yeah, it's obvious. Like, I wish you listeners could see her face right now, because she is just glowing with her passion for this project. And thank you so much for the work you're doing just to make the world a better place, and to make other people feel like they belong more in it. And I'm really appreciating getting to know you as a person.
Yeah. So. And we're from Clarksville, both of us. Clarksville, Tennessee,
not Indiana.
Yeah. I always have to clarify.
Yes, I've been saying I'm from Tennessee, and then they say, where in Tennessee?
Yes.
And then I say Clarksville, because if I say Clarksville, they're already thinking Indiana, no matter what I say otherwise in this Louisville area.
Yeah.
So it's so nice to meet somebody who feels my pain there. We grew up going to the same library. We were same two libraries.
Yes.
We were talking about the library transition when we were little.
Aww.
So that's so cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Lou Review podcast. Subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. I'd love to hear your comments and questions if you want to leave those there for me, or you can find me on social media at Rosa Raves. I do have a Facebook page as well called The Lou Review Podcast, and you're welcome to find me there as well. And I'll see you in the next episode.